but or maybe a little higher than that. But maybe the second or third one we've done here for True DFS. But we wanted to offer our members something where we, have like a little roundtable discussion, just sort of talk through process, the way we construct our lineups, the way that, maybe you do and that it's working for you, that's not working for you. And we thought we would just have like a mini coaching session / roundtable discussion. I did coaching for a long time. I actually met Sheets that way by trying to, he was really, really good at everything else and was getting into DFS. And we started talking about some DFS stuff. And that's sort of actually how our friendship started. And we just wanted to offer it to other people. And if they're interested, please let us know. Meanwhile, happy to welcome you, Scott. It's nice to, put a face to the name. And it's really been fun to have you as a part of the community and in the Discord and everything. Like, just feel like you're really positive vibes and it's a lot of fun sweating with you every night. But welcome here. And hopefully we can help each other out here.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. And it's a great community. I'm happy to be able to hang out. It's a good crowd.
Scott, let me ask you a couple of things. So before you even get into it, so tell me a little bit about your DFS play in general. In other words, do you work full time? How often do you play? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? I mean, how many hours do you kind of put into this? Like, how would you describe yourself as like a DFS player kind of in general?
Sure. Yeah. So I still work full time. I started playing back in 2016. It was NBA, and that's a spot where I started to think there's got to be a way to optimize this. There's got to be a smarter way to build lineups. And I didn't follow NBA that much, but figured there was info out there. And so sort of discovered optimizers and projections and that sort of thing as a newbie. And have been trying to grow from there ever since. Started as an MME player because I didn't have the confidence to try and pull out one lineup for a contest or even really know where to begin to build that. And I've gotten better at that over the years, but not anywhere near consistent. And where I want to be is I want to be someone that plays a handful of lineups that they feel really good about a night without a lot of FOMO and with, well thought out takes on a slate that have come out of some forethought rather than trying to jam things out of an optimizer and just see what happens. So that's where I've been trying to get. And
do you play every day?
I do play daily. Yeah.
What sports do you play?
MLB. I played some hockey this year. I've played more in past years. I do play some NASCAR. Did play NBA throughout the season. Even past the All-Star break, and still had some success there. And normally I wouldn't play beyond that.
And how many lineups do you tend to play when you play?
Well, so a typical night for me for MLB is the mini max, and then I'll try and hand build or pull out maybe 3, 4, or 5 that I think are good lineups that fit well in a single entry or 3 max forum. Mm-hmm. And so that's my general approach on a daily basis.
When you play mini max, do you play all 150? I
do.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your technology and your tools and stuff like that. Like, do you use a laptop? You use a desktop? What's your setup like?
Yeah, sure. So I work in technology, so I've got a little bit of everything. So I prefer to be here at the desktop that I'm at now. But if I've got scheduling issues and things like that, I grab my laptop and run. I used to be a Fantasy Cruncher user, but now I'm full-time SaberSim, and have gotten used to some of the things that I get for free there that otherwise I'd have to probably work a little harder for. But yeah, a lot of spreadsheets before projections go in, things like that.
And last thing, what is your daily content absorption schedule like? I mean, on a day-to-day basis. Let's say you were a day like you're playing MLB. Like, when do you start looking? What do you start looking at? Do you look at videos? Do you look at podcasts? Do you think about it during the day, or do you just kind of wait till 5 o'clock at night and see what's your intake of information like?
Yeah, so I used to consume a lot more content. My work schedule's gotten a lot busier, so I try and start with an early look at the slate in the morning, which is I can't tell if that's good or bad for me because there's no ownership or anything out at that point, so I don't get a great picture of where I think people are going. But I get an idea of where the totals are going to be, what the weather's going to be like, that sort of thing. I try and catch the what for me is the lunchtime stream with you guys. I try and go read the slate outlooks in the first look. I really don't consume any content outside of TrueDFS right now. I used to try and absorb everything, and I just don't have the time for it now.
And last question before I turn it over to Bobby. Were you like me? Were you like me and decide to play a $1,500 lineup with this Miller guy as the second pitcher for Oakland?
No,
Okay.
no. I did play a bunch of Mets stats.
Already
Yeah.
stepped ahead of me in this situation. So now,
Yeah.
With that, no, I would love to. Let's get into it. Let's talk about. Let's take a look at some past lineups. Maybe start with a positive one. I know we sweated that one night. We could talk about something like that.
Sure. Yeah. Here. Yeah, I can pull up a recent positive, and it was a single entry lineup. So that's good. That's where I've been trying to get. Let me get this blown up here.
Yeah, no worries.
And
there we go.
There you go. Let me know if you can see it.
You are a technology guy. I feel like every time we tried to do this, when we did this in the past, we had just no success. So I had to have everybody send it to me so I could post it.
Oh.
So you're already ahead of the curve as far as this goes. Let me just open this one up a little bit because I'm having a little trouble seeing it.
I can zoom in for you too.
Yeah, if you could zoom in a tiny bit. When is this? This is from. This is from
422. This is recent.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. And this is in the slap hitter, the early one. This is how many games do you remember were on the slate?
Great question. So 422 was actually that was real recent, wasn't it? Is that Saturday? Must have been Saturday.
Yeah. Although I had a good day.
Yeah. So that was 7 or 8 games.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
I think.
Everything. Yeah. So it was a full-on game stack, right? I can't see the bottom player on the picture.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, you're fine. I just
okay. Yeah, it was Hayward. You're fine not catching him on that day.
Yeah.
So
No, I played him too, and it still worked out fine for me. But I think that was a very logical game stack that for some reason was far lower owned than I thought. I actually really like the JD Martinez thing because it's the one Dodger people tend to leave out, and for reasonable reason, but the guy still has tremendous power and upside. So I like that idea in general. The only thing that obviously was probably missing that day, if it was 422, which would be Saturday, I believe. Would have been Outman, but I mean, that's just, you actually did an intelligent thing, even though obviously Outman hit 2 home runs or did whatever. He had a monster game. But I still like the play of the JD instead of taking a 15% owned Outman. He was the highest owned Dodger. Or actually, he might have been higher than that. He might have been 20. He was, because I remember him being right there with Muncy. But I like the strategy that just of doing all that. And then your one-off was Kirk, right?
Yes. Kirk was the one-off.
Yeah, and I like the idea in general of if you're going to do 4-2s, 4-3s, instead of doing 4-2-2 or 5-3 or whatever. I actually am a big 5-2-1 person, especially when it comes to the catcher and shortstop position, because there's a lot of ways to win the position that are different. And I actually think this looks like a kind of build that I would have hand put together. And it certainly makes a lot of sense to me. So I don't have a whole lot to criticize.
Hey, go backwards for a second. So what tournament is this? The slap hitter. What is this?
$66 buy-in.
How and what's the max entries that people could put in this thing?
I believe it's 12. I'm not 100% sure. We could probably look at the
actually I think on this day, I can just go to the videotape, right?
You can just go to the
detail.
I'm just looking at the number.
I never find that link when I'm looking for it. Yeah, it was a 15 entry this time.
15. That's not
good. How many people were in this?
516.
So, like when you decide to enter this, how do you assess how crazy you want to get. Like for a 500 and listen, you're playing a 500 person tournament in baseball.
Yep.
Do you look at ownerships in advance, ownership projections and are you kind of someone who with this type of tournament would not play like chalk pitchers and stacks or what's your approach to a tournament with this type of field size?
So if I'm playing a tournament with this field size, I'm paying up to get less variance, or at least I think I am, right? And I think you guys will correct me, but I think some of that's negated by the fact that it's a 15 entry max and not a single entry, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to not get too far off track with, being overly chalky or overly contrarian. And I have a tendency to over leverage, I think, often. And that's something that I struggle with. But that was sort of my mindset there. I knew pitching I would probably be a little different.
Well, let me follow. So when you do that, like for this particular lineup, this tournament, if you can remember, so what do you pull up the projections and then you just kind of eyeball it and just put in stuff, or do you use SaberSim to build even like this lineup, or how exactly did you come up with like a lineup like this? You just build it by hand, and are you looking at projections off to the screen, or you like how are you doing it like physically?
Yeah, no, I'm doing all my work in SaberSim.
Okay.
So I'm trying to take advantage of, and I'm trying to learn, I guess, the ropes and where the boundaries are for choosing the contest size when building. Although I think this came out of my larger build. So I have a standard core set of settings that I would build for sort of overall. And then I would start to pick through that and say, if these are all positive, if these are all plus EV lineups that I'm getting, and I like to think that most of them are coming out of SaberSim at least, what are the stacks that they're favoring? Where should I be looking? And then I'm sure I looked at stack ownership and player ownership and that sort of thing to try and decide, did I think I could get some of the Dodgers at a discount to fill out that stack and what I think was probably a pretty good weather situation for them, at least wind-wise. Might not have been temperature, but those are the things that are running through my head.
Well, what I would recommend is this. Could you unshare his screen and let me share my screen for a minute?
Sure. Do I unshare or do you just take it?
Sheets is the master of it. This is actually a good thing because I'm actually curious because I know Sheets, like for your big buy-ins, you'll hand build for.
Well, no, forget that. So I'm going to bring up his point where he said he used SaberSim to start off with. So I think this is like kind of important. Okay. So like today's slate, for example, like let's say I was going to start a build, and let's say that I was going to build like a bunch of lineups, something like that. So you're telling me that in this particular lineup, you pulled it from the pool of how many?
At least, so the pool that I built the pool size was 5,000. The number of lineups I was looking to get was 150.
Okay, so you're building from a 150 max build. Mm-hmm. So like for example, like I would start by putting like 150 max as the settings. Yep. I would use their default settings, and then I would just run 150 lineups to have 500. Okay, and then I presume you do this, and then you get like this whole pile of lineups, and then you pick your favorite or for whatever that means out of the out of the whatever. So let me caution you again. This is kind of like my thing, Bobby, with the SaberSim stuff. Is that if you start off building for 150 max, and then you kind of try to cull through it for like something that's only 500 lineups, you might end up getting just some way too off the wall lineups. Okay, because when you're originally building for 150 max, you're pulling from that pool of freaking lineups here, and like all these lineups I would get would be 150 max, and if I were going to put one lineup in a 66, something like that, I don't know if this is the answer to have SaberSim build them for you first. You know what I mean?
Right.
At 150 max settings. One thing you could do, and this is like a little trick, all right, is the default when SaberSim spits it out is this default that says sorting lineups by MLB large slate. So what you can do is then you can resort by a different slate size, okay?
Yep.
To get you a kind of a better kind of bunch of lineups to choose from. So maybe you pick this small slate setting, and then it'll kind of maybe it'll resort them or something like that. It'll kind of take a little bit of that 150 max variance out to be able to put in like the 66. Or another little trick you can do with SaberSim, you can even just go to projected score, because what this will do, yes, it does just basically optimize sort of, but what it's doing is it's first taking from this pool of like 150 max type lineups, and then giving you the most conservative of those. So it's not giving the most conservative of all the lineups, but it's the most conservative of kind of like the GPP stuff. So that's like one little trick that I do. Like if I wanted to go into things that are a little less variant than the 150 max, I'll start out by, like you said, putting the 150 max settings in. And then once the lineups are built, I'll retweak it by either putting projected score or something like that, So like for this particular one, your tournament, I'll unshare my screen, now. But that's like one bit of advice. If you're going to use SaberSim to start building them. Now, as Bobby says, when I'm building like for my bigger buy-ins, like or whatever I'm single entry in, I'm usually not having SaberSim build for me. I'm usually just kind of like having, just using the projections and just kind of like hand building. But that does take some work, and a little experience. But you've been doing it for a while. I think that you could probably, for the 66, probably get away with hand building, and it, if you. But there's certainly nothing wrong with having SaberSim do it. But just be careful about the settings that you start off with the SaberSim.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Sheets is saying, and I just want to add one point before you talk, Scott. Just I do think that even if you wanted to take those lineups, it's so hard to find, and it's such a strange thing. And baseball is really different than other sports. Like in the NBA, it would be very hard to me to be successful doing that consistently. In MLB, it's actually possible because of the weird variance of the sport, and leaving 10K on the table is never going to work in NBA, but in MLB, it actually could work. You know what I mean? Sure. There's no reason why it couldn't. So I actually mind it less for MLB, but I like the idea of what Sheets was saying as an adjustment on the SaberSim side of things. I do think that trying to use that, and especially if you're combining it with our thoughts or our plays or things like that, maybe formatting something like that or making a switch or two on your favorite of those 150. But I do think you might be creating a little too much of your own extra work, and maybe not to your own benefit by doing that. Yeah. Okay. I do have a question. Since you mentioned the different approach in Saber, something I've been trying to do is, the ownership projections that we're used to getting are for more of the lotto, right? Yep. They're more for the large field, and they condense obviously in smaller field, which is where I want to be more consistently. So I've been trying to track within some range, how much does that ownership condense, and adjust the ownership that gets plugged into SaberSim, and then saying, hey, I'm building for 1,000-man single entry. Now help adjust, because I know ownership, they use their adjusted ownership to help accommodate for the field. I don't know if that's overthought or not, but I'd like to get your thoughts.
Well, my thought, and then Bobby will come in, is that's one of the issues with ownership projections, is that the ownership projections across the industry are for the big MME lottery tournaments. Okay, that's what they all are. It also varies by each site. Like, for example, like Roto Grinders averages specifically for, like the actual $15, $20, whatever it is, baseball, 20 for NBA. Go ahead, so my point is that, so if you're going to make intelligent use of ownership projections, for building lineups other than the lottery, you could either make kind of intelligent adjustments, and we can talk about how to do that, or you could just accept the fact, that your ownership projections are just going to be a little bit off. You know what I mean? Which is, it's not the end of the world, but like sometimes you'll hear Bobby and we talk about this in the when we do our slate previews. We will say, oh, like XYZ is going to be like 45% owned in the lotto, but probably 80 in like single here in the 55. Now, unfortunately, that's not based on anything numerical. That's just based on our experience, just with these guys. And typically, what I will say is that here's kind of a little shortcut. Guys that are really, really good, like point per dollar plays that are kind of names that are not the highest known guys are always going to be like 3 times as high owned in the big buy-ins. You know what I mean? As they are in the lotto, because in the lotto, people are not going to be willing to click on some name just because they're that they happen to project really, really well if no one's heard of them. But like you get like a cheapo dude and like a cheapo baseball guy in baseball, and he projects really well. Even if his name is like Joe Slobodnik, you know what I mean? Like the gap between the lotto and the big buy is going to be immense.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, and it is a tricky thing to figure, especially. It's one thing that I really appreciate about Goldie's projections that really are an aggregate throughout the industry. It's the most accurate you're going to find, and it won't be 100% accurate for each tournament you're playing, but it'll be the best general average of what everybody else is projecting.
Well,
it is for the larger field tournaments.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something, Scott. And I've talked about this when I first put out my sheets. Is I do back testing of all before I accept the model into my kind of like system. I do back testing on it for accuracy, just so I can figure out how to weight it. And I did it for ownership projections as well. And the way I always rate them is I said, okay, Awesemo is this, Roto Grinder is this close, such and such is this close, such and such is this close. And then I always kept track also of how close the average was of all of them. And without fail, the average is always the best one. like across the board. And I don't know if you're a statistics guy, but it makes perfect sense. That's the way the law of large numbers works. Like the more people that are putting their expert input into something, the more likely that result's going to converge on accuracy. So that's why it's kind of neat when Goldie puts the aggregate stuff up there. It is like almost by definition going to be the best ownership projections. You know what I mean? You might get every once in a while, also will get better on one, and Roto Grinders get better on one, and Saberson will get better on the other. But if you're dealing with ownership projections, you really want it to aggregate them, because the thing is that the people always ask, well, why don't you ever discuss how your projections did against actual results? Okay, to analyze that is almost kind of stupid because you're never going to get a projection to match results, and it's really not as important, because what you're looking for in outcomes is kind of like a range of outcomes, whatever. But it is important to rate the actual ownership projections, because that's kind of a static thing. That if I predict that John Rahm is going to be 50% owned and he was 70% owned, that's a shitty prediction. You know what I mean? However, if I predict that John Rahm is going to score 90 fantasy points and he scores 130, that doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? Because all projection outcomes are ranges of outcomes. But ownership projections are not range of outcomes. That's what they're actually going to be. You're predicting what they are going to be owned this particular day. When you're making points projections, you're projecting on kind of the median of a range of outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are really good points.
Okay.
All right. So wait. So let's. You want to get back to your line? I'm sorry. We strayed a little bit, but I wanted to see how you got to it. So you're saying you went from Saberson, and then you picked your favorite, and I'll grill you a little more on this. So how did you decide something like this was your favorite?
So it varies, right? So do you want me to pull up you want me to pull another one up, or
sure.
Same one? Just talk through it.
Anything, pull up whatever one. Another one's fine, but we could talk still about the original.
I'll pull up a stinker while I'm talking through.
Yeah, I could care less what the result was. You know what I mean? I just want to know
No, I know.
how you went about even the one you were just talking about is fine. you know?
Either way, this is a different one.
Now let me ask you this: when in baseball,
Yeah.
are you a stickler for? Actually, I don't want to say use this word stickler because I don't want to sway your answer. Do you typically try to make 5-man stacks? Is it slate dependent? And in that, you know, that's kind of a bailout. So yeah, sure, it's slate dependent. What about the slate depends? You know what I mean? Like what in your opinion is a slate that says, oh, I'm gonna have to have 5-man stacks? Which is a slate that says I can do whatever. Like, what's your thought process as far as that goes?
So I've typically forced myself into 5-mans more often than not. I don't believe that's always the right answer. But as far as discerning when 4-mans versus when 5s, you know, even to say it's slate dependent, I know it's probably slate dependent. But that said, that doesn't mean I'm good at determining what the slate is telling me I should be doing. And my inconsistent results will you know, they point that out, I guess. But the things that I'm looking for when I'm sifting through those lineups, in my head at least, I'm looking to see, you know, do I have lineups with a lot of one-offs where, you know, maybe the guy's batting at the bottom of the order and he's not a bargain. He's just there because I'm getting a 5-man, you know, Yankee stack, for example. And maybe I don't want, you know, or not for the one-off, but, you know, trying to put the best option and the most opportunity in place in each lineup is really what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to sort out some of the, what I perceive to be junk at the time. And in hindsight, maybe it isn't always, but those are the things that are going through my head. Is there someone that's drastically overowned based on what their range of outcomes is likely to be? You know, is it a slate where Aaron Judge is going to be 35% owned someplace because of whatever?
Well,
you know,
so
maybe I want a lot less. Maybe I don't want him in a single entry lineup.
Okay, fine. So if there is a slate like that, let's again. I don't want to get away with that answer. So okay. So let's say that is what it is. So Aaron Judge is going to be 35% owned on a slate. Once again, how is that going to impact whether you 4 or 5-man stack like the Diamondbacks, like for example?
That wouldn't impact whether I was going to 4 or 5-man stack. No, that would impact maybe whether I would have him in the stack, or maybe whether I'd have him as a one-off. But yeah, not 4 or 5-man. But to go back to the 4 or 5-man, I'm definitely not good at discerning, you know, large slate, small slate, you know, today, or 4-man's better or 5-man's better. I'd like to think that I'd be able to pick out, you know, 4-man's in this case because the pieces just fit better. But the longer I look, the more I can talk myself into.
Well,
you know,
I'll tell you this, Bobby is the legit like expert at that type of thing, like what types of slates are good for 5. Because I'm like OCD 5-man stack dude. You know what I mean? Like I come from a world of correlation, and if I can get a 5-man stack, I'm just going to do it. It just makes too much mathematical sense to me.
Yeah.
However, the in my opinion, right? Because I haven't proven this. The smaller the slate goes, the less likely I need to do that. You know what I mean? That's my guideline. But Bobby, why don't you help him out? Why don't you get into a little more about how you figure out when you need a 5-man or when you need a 4-man or whatever it is?
Well, to start off with, just in the laws of probability, when 90% of people are doing one thing, doing something different helps. Doesn't matter how high the correlation, except for certain instances. Also, the correlation means a lot less when you're talking about larger slates in general, because there are going to be more outlier performances by other people that can, you know, accompany your 2,200 now. Hilliard would be a terrible example because he had 2 home runs and stole a base. But guys like that playing Eddie Rosario every day this year until the last 2, you have a guy who basically has a year and a half shown 0 power or 0 anything. And really, they're hanging on to a playoff run against the Dodgers. Now, it happened to pay off the last couple of days, but if you're going to continue to play those guys consistently and continue to play full 5-man stacks and play those guys at like 20% ownership, I just think that there's a better way of doing it. And the number one thing for me is to try to get different, even in like, if there's a stack I really like that's the most popular stack, there are ways you can stack it creatively. Stack the bottom of it, and look how often it works. I mean, look at tonight, for example. Whoever wins that big one, it's probably going to have the bottom of the Atlanta stack or the bottom of the Blue Jays stack. You know what I mean? because you're then betting on a scenario. But in general, the basic rule for it is like the more games, less games, the less you need to 5-man stack. In general, I still don't believe that you always do. I think that just getting different is good enough. But a lot of that has come from experience. From even the other day when I finished second in that tournament, it was a 4-2-1-1 stack. It was a 6-game or 7-game slate, but that's not going to be spit out by any optimizer because legitimately it doesn't make a lot of sense. But when I think about it, okay, well, I know the Dodgers are the worst team at holding runners on, so I'm going to make sure to. And you have what's his name on the mound, May, who I actually like, but you're going to get run on basically all the time here, especially without your starting catcher. And you have Nico Horner on the other side. Basically, a walk means 7 points. You know what I mean? So that's an immediate one-off that I looked at, which is nothing I would have said about Nico Horner, but with the new rules, he steals the most bases in baseball of anybody, and facing the team that can't stop anybody from stealing. So anyway,
Scott, let me press you for one more question. So you have a stack of 5, whatever, and then you do have kind of like. Unless you do a full 5-3 or whatever it is, or 5-2, then you're going to have a one-off, or whatever it is. Do you have any, how do you deal with your one-offs? I mean, do you just, do you just, if you have 24, let's say you have a nice little 5-2 or whatever it is, and you're like, I have 3,200 left over. Do you just kind of sort by point per dollar and say the best 3,200? Do you have any requirements for what your one-off is going to look like as a play or anything like that, or do you give that any thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I think I'll at least browse from a point per dollar standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. But depending on maybe pitching for a particular slate, maybe I'm off the chalkiest pitcher. Maybe my one-off will be a guy against that pitcher. Right. Maybe I'll try and use that as a leverage spot if it makes sense. I try and make sure they're batting up in the lineup. I don't want anybody, I want that one-off to get some decent opportunity. But that's, if I'm thinking about it and if I'm trying to fill the last spot in the lineup, those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. But again, I'm not hand building much, so that's not a position I'm often in. Because Scott, I'm looking for a
Scott. Let me help you out with this because Bobby sort of undersold, the way our relationship developed in this. He literally taught me how to play DFS. Okay, and listen, I'm obviously like most things in my life, I'm a quick study and everything like that. But I had questions all throughout, but I continue to have them. But one thing that he taught me, really important, and I you don't even think about this, is that your one-offs better have something. You know what I mean? And that's the way I'm going to put this. Either power or stolen base upside. They have to be able to generate some upside by themselves. And the reason I bring that up is, when I first started, I would go to take up Roto Grinders, go to Lineup HQ, run my shit. You know what I mean? Run my builds, and the same thing can happen with SaberSim. And then you'll end up, and this is what will happen sometimes, you'll get a 2K guy who's hitting 8th in something or whatever, who's basically just a filler in the lineup that can't do anything. But because he's 2K, he'll project for 5-6 fantasy, whatever it is, and he'll show up in all the optimizer lineups. And I'll end up with this. I use the term Lewis Brinson, even though that's not exactly the right answer. But or Nick Madrigal, guys like this, like that, just can't do anything. You gotta be careful about guys like that just kind of show up as one-offs. You really have to cull through those and make sure that your one-offs have something. You know what I mean? And either home runs or at least in this environment, and stolen base as well. Did I summarize that okay, or Bobby? You want to expand on that a little bit, or?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that you want speed. You need to have speed and power if you're going to be playing guys as one-offs. It makes no sense to do so unless that's the case. It makes no sense to take a chalky player from a popular stack unless it's legitimately the best stolen base and power match. Or if Acuna is playing hitting against Syndergaard, he's going to be 25% owned, and the rest of your stack is going to be the Giants, who are all less than 4% owned. You're fine using him as a one-off because he's going to almost always get points, and when he does, They're in the double digits often enough because of the stolen base and power upside. So every now and then it's okay, but in general, if you're going to stack someone if you're going to use guys as one-offs from those types of games, you better have like a reason for it. And I wanted to sort of throw it back at you, Scott, and ask if you've tried hand building yet, or if there's a sport that you may feel more comfortable doing it in.
Yeah. So I have on occasion. It's not the norm for me. I think of all the sports, I think baseball is probably one where I would feel a little more confident hand building, right? Because of the stacking element, because of only having need a couple of pieces right if you're doing it right. NFL would maybe be somewhere behind that. NBA it's a no-fly zone for me for hand building. So that I rely on the tools for to help point me for sure. But MLB is one where I could spend more time doing that. Absolutely.
No, I think that it's something you should give a shot out to, and don't try it once and let us know how it goes. Try it 20 days in a row and see how it goes. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And you can put it in the $1 single entry. It doesn't matter. It's not even about results. It's about being comfortable with the process that's going to help you optimize what you're doing with your money.
Yeah,
and I believe that truly.
But
yeah, Scott, I wanted to see if there's anything else you wanted to go over or talk about, or any general questions that come up. Anything that we could answer better, either through what we're offering or through the way we do our shows, or directly, that we can answer questions. Any thoughts or questions you have, man?
Yeah, I guess what I'm curious about is, and I'll put this out to each of you, is, when you start your day, when you start thinking about the slate and what lineups you might build, where do you start? So I think you guys are going to be fairly different, right? Bobby, I don't imagine that you're spending a ton of time looking at projections. You've got a better feel for the game, so you're looking at different elements maybe than you are, Sheets. I don't know, but I'd love to hear your individual takes on how you get.
Gotten pretty good at getting pretty familiar with the game as well at this point. It's a good question. I'll just say my part of it first. Yeah, I like to ideally I like to make my decisions after me and Sheets go through our first thing and do my first builds after me and Sheets talk. But my actual first builds often come the night before, very early in the morning, just as my first thoughts as I look at something. And those lineups you almost always end up in something. You know what I mean? Whether it's the smallest tournament I'm playing or whatever. And what's weird is sometimes they've won, and my questioning myself throughout the day for no reason when it comes to NBA slates where there's no news, which is pretty rare. But like a playoff slate, I've had that happen before where I've overthought the whole process, and my actual initial instincts that I thought of 5 a.m. made perfect sense. I just tried to find ways to get too creative after looking at ownership and things like that. So sometimes it works both ways for me. I mean, in general, I always want to get a baseline for projections before I end up going into it for basketball. I don't even care at all what the baseball projections are. I'm curious what the ownership is more than anything. I don't ever really look at players' actual projections in baseball outside of pitchers because we talk about it. And even then, I think it's a ridiculous, the range of outcomes are so wide. And one of the tools I like on the SaberSim is when they tell you how often they expect each to occur through 10,000 simulations or whatever it be. Because I think that's actually the way you should be playing baseball versus others. You know what I mean? You want the outlier performance. If Josiah Gray only has 5 games like this a year, but he's always going to be 1% owned on these slates, you probably should play him if you're max entering almost always at least some percentage if you believe that to be the case. I believe that to be the case. But I wouldn't have played him I didn't play him in my 4 big entries. You know what I mean? He ended up in a couple of my little dumpster fire ones. But my whole thought process is I like to try and get an idea in basketball, especially, what I want to do. In baseball, it's actually pretty easy to do because you can usually identify the spots based on, really bad teams are usually going to have bad pitchers. And when they're facing good teams with good hitters, it sounds very simple, then play those teams. If you're facing a mediocre pitcher with a terrible bullpen behind them, you should treat that guy like a bad starting pitcher. That's one thing I try to think about in baseball that maybe is a little different. But I do. It does vary for me, but for the most part, I like to go through it with Sheets and go through each game and look at it from that perspective. Sorry, Sheets, go ahead.
No, this is a really loaded question because how I attack analysis and how I attack my day on a specific slate. Obviously, it really depends on the sport for openers. Okay, Because listen, I play all the sports, and how I approach a daily baseball slate is totally different than how I'll approach a golf slate for Thursday, and also how I'll approach an MMA slate. Like I'll tell you something interesting. Of all the sports that I absorb external content for, I would say that it's almost like a 10-to-1 ratio MMA over all of the others. Like I listen to external MMA podcasts and external stuff more than any other sport. You know what I mean? Because I don't know why. I just actually enjoy it. And boy, one day I'll go through like literally like my weekly routine of what I listen to when, and it's basically the same every single week, And the thing about baseball, it's kind of screwy because you know what? Since I started doing content, it's a different process for me because I now am, I would say forced, but now that I'm kind of in charge of putting the projections up, you know what I mean? Like on the site, I find myself, looking at them more, than I would have otherwise. I only wonder if I wasn't going to actually put them on the site, whether I might not even look at it at all until 5 o'clock at night. I honestly don't even know at this point. But listen, my actual process is that it helps me talk through everything with Bobby. So listen, I put the projections up there. I see what they're going to look like. And I will tell you this, the baseball projections don't really change throughout the course of the day all that much. So as opposed to like the NBA, which is like a ridiculous joke, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I mean, I'll first thing I'll do is, because I'm doing it for the site anyway, I'll look at the projections and say, okay, who looks like the best projected point per dollar pitchers? Those are probably going to be the chalk / the best plays, right? Then I'll look at my sheets and I'll look at the left side and I'll say, who rates the best for raw stacks? Those will probably be the chalk and the best plays, right? So by noon, when Bobby and I kind of go through it, I already know who's going to look like the best plays and who's probably going to be, quote unquote, the best plays. But that's not what we really care about. You know what I mean? Like, right. Especially in baseball. Basketball, it's kind of important to know who the best play is going to be. Like baseball, it's more important to know like what the best lineup is going to look like, as opposed to who the best plays are. So for me, I like looking at the projections to see what is going to look good. But then the fun begins. Then becomes, okay, I'm looking at the ownership projections, which, as Bobby so perfectly mentioned, are a hell of a lot more important than the actual projections. Because the difference between like the top stacks projection and the lowest stack projection is maybe like 8 points or something like that. And if one's going to be like 80% owned, the other's going to be 9. That's the important thing, So
right.
So we come at it from different takes, but in a way sort of the same in that listen, Bobby's gonna eventually like look and see who looks good, but at the end of the day, we care more about who looks kind of like good enough. You know what I mean? Like, and not even just good enough. It is, and we talk about this in basketball and more than so in baseball. We probably should do it more in baseball. Is that median projections are different? Like 2 median projections of 12 could be completely different animals. You could have one dude in the NBA who projects for 30, and the way, you know what a median is, right? The median is the middle number of like a bunch of numbers, right? So if you have one guy who gets 30 every single day, his median is going to be 30. If you have a guy who gets 20 times and then a 30 and then 100 30 times, his median is going to be 30 also. Okay.
Right.
The Michael Porter Jr. versus Harrison Barnes argument.
Right. But in GPPs, this is not clear either, but you normally want the guy with the 100 median of 30, as opposed to 30, unless, again, this is when you think about this stuff, is if you have like one slot is like, it's $5,600 left in an NBA lineup, for example, and you have one guy to put in, and you got a choice between one guy who's the 100 guy or the 30 guy. It's not just as easy to say, well, take the 100 guy. It depends what you need that 5,600 for. Like if the rest of your lineup is already like cuckoo nuts, you know what I mean? You kind of need that 5,600 guy to be the guy to kind of hold the fort, you know, while the rest of the lineup tries to go bananas. But if the rest of your lineup is kind of like chalky, then you need the 5,600 guy to be the guy to help you go nuts. So,
but then you get into adjusting. So one of the things that I can use as an example from today, and a lot of people are going to watch this at different times, is like what do you do later in the day when this stuff happens? Because to me, I'm really paying attention to the ownership part of it. So going into the day, me and Cheats do our show at the morning, and we're seeing 30% projected, but basically across the board on Barrios. Okay, I did not like him at 30 some odd percent. When as the shows got talking and the percentages started dropping low enough, I started to love him because I thought there was a chance he would be in the 10 to 15% range. In that case, I want to be 3 times him because it was a high variance pitching slate. I think the upside versus the White Sox, who haven't scored more than 5 runs in the last 12 games, et cetera, et cetera. But now all of a sudden that play looks like a really good play because then you're getting the low ownership and you're differentiating from what the chalk is going to be. He ended up 7% owned and having the best night of everybody. Now we don't want to be results oriented, but it's important to realize that the difference. So all of a sudden I went from having 0 Barrios in my original builds, except for I had 1 on FanDuel to try to hedge, like just in case. And then I ended up with, 30% of them because of the perception across the industry of, wow, we're really going to play Barrios was much stronger than it was about Blake Snell, because Blake Snell, even when they say it, all these other people who host every show, they'll tell you the truth. Cheats, what always happens with Blake Snell? He always ends up being more popular any slate that he's talked about than people act like he's going to be.
That's something that's worth tracking. And again, that's very what I want Evan to do is to really track how actual players tend to be owned relative to their projected ownership. And I did something for golf with that, and I found, like, remember we did this like last year. Every week, Will Zalatoris was 10% more owned than he was every single time. And then there was Xander Schauffele, who was always, you know what I mean? And these guys do go in and out of favor, so it's worth continuing to monitor. And there are guys like Bobby is saying who just always no matter what they project, they just get owned more or less, depending on.
And part of why it's important to listen to things is not that I said I'm not going to play. I ended up with like 2 Josiah Gray lineups, but using that as an example of everybody who talks about him is based on 1 year's pitching experience for a guy who has now become like an extreme ground ball and strikeout pitcher and is not walking people, from an extreme walking guy who struck everybody. And this goes back to his spring training and everything. It's been 15 games or whatever we've seen of it, and he literally looks like a totally different pitcher. He was one of the top prospects 2 years ago. So all of a sudden, everyone's perception based on 1 year is completely false. We have to at least give the person the benefit of the doubt. We also can't be overreactive, and that's where I think it's important to listen into things and be tuned in a little bit to these sports at least. So you can make those decisions yourself when you start to hear the same things over again. And like one thing you have with us that you can do, and it's not always going to work, but like ask me and Rody direct questions, ask 2v2s, ask thoughts about one pitcher versus another, why they make sense. I'm happy to answer them while we're live in Discord as much as we possibly can. That's what we really want to be here for, is not just a site that's out there telling you who to play every day, to really try to figure out why and a way for you to figure out your strategy.
Scott, how do you deal with late swap?
Well, it depends. So late swap, I'm trying to maintain my stacks if I can, right? So I don't want to break. If I've got a 5-man that I'm happy with, and somebody's out, but there's a viable play that's taking the place, I want to stick with it. If I've got time, if it ruins the lineup altogether, and I've got enough open slots, I might rebuild it. So I don't have a strict, here's how I handle it. It's sort of case by case.
Well, I'll be a little more direct then. Are you around like all night for possible late swaps, or do you
typically,
put your lineups in and then you go out for dinner and stuff like that?
Typically, and even if I do, if it's a night like that, I probably won't run, say, the mini max.
Okay.
Maybe I'll just hand build or hand choose, I guess, right? 3, 4, 5 lineups and manage them that way.
My advice again is to do as I say, not as I do, because I just can't. But be a little more diligent about that than you already are, even if you are already. And
okay.
To the point, a point of and I don't know exactly how to do this, because what SaberSim, this is where hand building will help, because what SaberSim will do is it will late swap for you. You know, like if you want, you know, put your entries in, you know, it'll late swap for you. But what it won't do is assess what type of swaps you need. Okay, so SaberSim is unable to gauge how crappy your lineups are doing or how well your lineups are doing, and so that requires a little bit of either a really good program, which might come out, or some massaging and again, like, so if you need to juice up some lineups, your late swap is going to look different than if you need to kind of protect a lead. But at the very least, what you should do, I think, even if you're 150 maxing, is, and this is what I would do if I had time, is that you look at, like, and you know which lineups are in contention, honestly. So if you look and you see their lineups that are really in contention and you really kind of have the nuts, give those kind of a one-off look of your eyes, you know, and say, okay, maybe I need to kind of like just tighten this one up a little bit. You know, if I already have, like, if I got away with my 2% owned guys early, maybe I don't need the rest of the night to also have 2% owned guys. You know, maybe the rest of the night I could tighten it up and challenge everybody to come and get me. Where on the other hand, if you had yeah. And if you had chalk and all this stuff, you know, you need to kind of, like, you know, do whatever it takes, you know, to get there, then maybe you need to juice it up a little bit. And this is, and you should wait a little while, because one of the reasons why he ended up with Miller, by the way, he's doing fine, actually. He's going to get through 4 with, like, probably more than 10 fantasy points, which is better than it looked like in the first inning. Is that after, like, a couple of innings, like, Joe Ryan was my other pitcher, and he was kind of struggling. He was giving up hits, like, all this stuff, and I'm like, oh, he's going to get like freaking 12 fantasy points. I got to freaking do something in the later games. So I swapped off of who I wanted, and I went to Miller, because I figured he would just have a lot more juice. Now, as it turns out, Ryan ended up just fine, thank you, and I didn't even need to do this, you know?
Yeah.
So don't.
I still think it's right that you did. Like, he's the most expensive pitcher, high owned, and he wasn't nearly the highest scoring pitcher, even though, you know what I'm saying? Right. So it's still the right idea, even though it didn't maybe work out this time.
Yeah. But man, this guy does throw like a freaking 105 miles an hour.
No, he's got talent, 100%. The fact that he became like the 4th highest owned pitcher, though, in the big buy, like, I was like,
I figured that.
He's the guy who literally up to lock had across the board like a 3%, 4% ownership projection.
Oh, San Francisco home run. Okay. That's something.
Could I trouble you with one more question?
Oh, help yourself, please, man.
When you're hand building, let's say, and I don't know how, if you are hand building on a given day, I don't know how many lineups you're building, but how much correlation are you looking for between your portfolio, or how much separation are you trying to get?
Excellent question. In general, with baseball, I would say per slate, it's dependent. Again, it depends, and it depends on how many stacks you actually like. Like, sometimes you might only like 3 or 4 stacks on a 12-game slate. Great. Don't try to deviate from it too much. Don't try to find another one. Sure. You know what I mean? That's my take about that. But I'm constantly finding 10 and trying to narrow it down to almost, on like 12-game slates, to have somewhere between 3 and 5 that I focus on. But I want to make sure I have different parts of those cores. So, like, if I'm playing 3 in the 777, and then let's say I play 3 in the 250 and then 6 in the 88 or something, I'll make sure to get the other parts of those stacks and include different complementaries of players with those same stacks. But I like to get 3 to 5. Pitching is always dependent. I hate to really say that, but it's true. Today, I literally used like 11 pitchers on a small slate. I mean, 10 or 11 between all my lineups. That's in general too many, but this is the kind of slate where it was worth it, because getting to 25% of one of them in Barrios is probably what's going to save my night. And I think that you want to, in general, though, the attitude should always be try to get more narrow, not more spread out. Sheets, tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not really the guy to ask about the hand builds. I'll do a hand build for like one lineup, but I haven't really hand built like 20 in like a long time.
Yeah. But what about with the but I mean, in general, how many teams are you? I mean, I know you take huge chances, like you did in golf. One of the coolest things I thought you did was at the Masters, I think what did you play? 39 golfers, and you didn't play the 2 most expensive. Who cares whether it worked? Doing stuff like that when you're playing 150 lineups, is an incredible way to get ahead of the field.
Dude, let me tell you something. Okay, and I don't know. I told you this the other day, but you were listening, so I was talking really to everybody else. So I don't know you, Scott. You saw I had a big score in the MMA this weekend. Okay, and the way I did that, okay, is that there were 22 fighters on the slate. Okay, that's kind of a short slate. I happen to have liked 10 of them, kind of like more than the other. Okay, more than the others. And MMA's got a lot of variance to it, but I said, I don't care. These are like my favorite underdogs. I took the 10 guys I liked the most, and I just plowed every combination of those 10 into SaberSim, and literally put every lineup in, and I didn't care about leaving money on the table or any of it. And those types of stands in 150, what ended up happening, I mean, like I had three underdogs that I had 67% owned. They all came in. 67% I owned. They all three came in, and I was left with freaking I had the whole tournament locked going into the last, and that's a great feeling, And I'll tell you, when you take big stands in 150 or even in 30, whatever it is, you'd be surprised. Like if those get there, like those early games, it seems as though like these late games, you can like do anything. You know what I mean? And you're always you're in contention. So that's why I have no problem, by the way, like whether it's SaberSim or by myself or whatever, I have no problem taking stands in every sport. I mean, if it makes sense to you, I would just do it. Because you know what? Listen, you're not the only guy putting in 150 lineups. It's hard. Okay. It's really hard to beat all these freaking people. And sometimes, listen, we talk about one of the guys from the other site, like Big T. He has his other issues, but he'll take a freaking big old stand. You know what I mean? Yeah. And if it works, I mean, that's how you win $1 million sometimes. You know what I mean? So whether it's 30 or 150, don't feel as though you have to have some of everybody. And it's tempting. Yeah. It's tempting. I'm playing 150 lineups. I got to have at least a sliver of this. Maybe you just don't.
Before you know it, you've got no stand at all. Yeah.
Right. He played 3. I remember this. He talked about this because he won $500,000 in one of it was like the 1,500. There was a special, or a football one was 1,000 maybe buy-in. It was $1 million for first, but he chopped it. I can't remember what it was, but it was like literally San Francisco was 1% on. He played 3 lineups. And he had every player from San Francisco. He had like 5 of them in every lineup in football, right. and just a different version of the 5. And I was like, okay, you're gonna lose. He knows, like you're okay. $3,000 down the drain or a chance to win $1 million. You know what I mean? The fact that he tied with someone else, with a different lineup too, which was really weird. It wasn't even the same stack, but it's the right idea to try to harness as much as you can. And maybe you get pieces of it. I mean, one of the 6-figure wins that I had was a 4-2-2 stack where my team that was my 4 stack scored 0 runs. But my 2-2s, I had 2 guys who hit multiple home runs, 2 other guys who stole bases, and ended up with, they all scored 20 or more basically, and a couple of them had 35. Now, it is an outlier, but they were also my other favorite stacks that I couldn't quite get to, but I could get to the pay up for just it was like Nelson Cruz both times that this has happened to me, where I won 6 figures and he was just a 2-man or a one-off. But you find the right matchup and like, okay, well, that makes enough sense to me I get some exposure to that lineup I wanted to get anyway with the best hitters. I'm just not going to get to all the other guys, and I don't like them anyways a stack because the team doesn't walk enough and strikes, all that stuff, whatever. But I think it's important to just realize that differentiating your play just a little bit, especially in single entry, you can definitely do more 4-2-2s, 4-3-1s, and it makes a lot of profitable sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, we've got our other thing to go soon. But Scott, let's catch up with how things are going and talk about, like, look, if you have direct questions, I'll be in Discord all the time, and you're welcome to hit me up in there and just say, hey, look, what do you think about this for a single entry? And then we'll go through it.
All right. That sounds great. I appreciate it.
Awesome. It's
Thanks very much.
Thanks a
lot. Talking to you. Thank you.
Have a good one. So, Bobby, if you want, I'll fire up the stream.
All right. So, say goodbye to Scott. You fire it up. I'll be back in 5 minutes. All right.
So I'll fire it up. Okay.